Howdy gamers, I'm the 112. This is the channel where I'm always right, and I've got one question for you. Are we still rocking with Star Wars? Cause if not, then what did you think this video was gonna be about? But since you're here, you should drop a like, subscribe, and stick this video on your second monitor. Please. I am no longer asking. Anyway, Jedi Survivor is a game released in 2022 that should have been released in 2023 at the earliest. Not because it's a bad game that needed more time to refine its story or gameplay, but because the devs themselves literally asked for another year to make sure the game would run properly. To which EA courteously responded with, "Lol nah." I'm Commander Shepard, and this is a public service announcement to do your own research rather than getting opinions off Twitter like I did. What actually happened is the devs themselves were asked how much longer they needed to complete the game. They said 6 weeks, and then stuck to that. Meaning the game released with performance issues that plague it to this day. Credit where it's due, Respawn is still releasing updates to make the game run better, and it's definitely working. Unfortunately, all the gameplay I've recorded is from launch, so I apologize for how much of this video might look like I filmed it on a VHS tape that was put through a spin cycle. Honestly, I'm making it sound worse than it really is. Outside of some artifacting and frame drops in the more massive open world sections, I'm looking at you, Kobo. The game tends to run perfectly fine. My main complaint about the performance issues is how it impacts the gameplay depending on what difficulty setting you're playing on, but I'll circle back around to that in a minute. I'm sure you'd like to hear about the actual gameplay, so let's talk about it. In terms of improvement from Fallen Order, Survivor really feels like the game Respawn wanted to make. There's more movement, more force abilities, more character customization, and best of all, more lightsaber stances. And while I was fully expecting the devs to only add one new stance since they'd teased it in the first game, I was pleasantly surprised to find that there were 5 total stances, 3 of which being completely new. Hell, you could even argue for 4 if you'd consider the addition of a full skill tree for the double-bladed lightsaber a new stance. I should probably mention that each stance gets its own full skill tree, which is actually so cool. None of these feel like an afterthought, and you unlock all of them relatively early in the game, giving you plenty of time to experiment and figure out which ones are your favorites. And by that I mean you will unlock dual wield and blaster stance, equip both of them, and never look back. You're gonna look at this gameplay and tell me that the idea of living out the redneck ninja fantasy with 50 cal Kestis doesn't absolutely fucking rip. Even if that somehow doesn't sound cool to you, I'm sure you'll be able to find a lightsaber stance combo that calls to you. Are you big on single target damage? Dual wield allows you to blitz a health bar with the speed of your average Floridian substance user, while crossguard provides the satisfaction of smashing your enemies over the head with a comically large hammer. Find yourself getting overwhelmed by groups of enemies? Throw on the double-bladed saber and turn into a force field Beyblade, or better yet, show the galaxy why the Second Amendment should have stopped at muskets. You may have noticed that I have yet to mention the single blade stance, and that's not because it's bad, it just commits the cardinal sin of being boring in a Star Wars game. It's like vanilla ice cream. If there's nothing better, I won't be mad about it, but if you were to offer me the choice of vanilla or mint chocolate chip, I'm taking the mint chocolate chip 10 times out of 10. And if you're in the comments typing some shit like, "But mint chocolate chip tastes like toothpaste," I am begging you to go brush your teeth. All this is really just to say that with how many new abilities are provided, you're able to approach combat in whatever manner you see fit. Couple that with the plethora of force abilities at your disposal, and it creates a self-sustaining gameplay loop that only gets as stale as you let it. I know I haven't talked about the force abilities at all so far, but that's because they're mostly the same from the first game, with a couple new additions that I'm going to talk about as they appear in the story, which we'll get to momentarily. Real quick, I'm going to tangent for a minute about difficulty settings, specifically relating to this game and how they're impacted by the aforementioned performance issues. So if you don't want to hear about that, timestamps are down below so you can skip around. Now, the difficulty settings have remained the same from the first game, but in case you didn't play it, I'll give you a quick recap. You're presented with the 5 options of Story, Jedi Padawan, Jedi Knight, Jedi Master, and Jedi Grandmaster, with each ascending level of difficulty tightening your parry window while increasing enemy aggression as well as the amount of damage you take. As a bonus, you're not just locked to whichever setting you picked at the start of the game. You can swap between difficulties as you see fit, which I'll admit I utilized a few times. Not because I found an encounter particularly hard, but because of those pesky performance issues. See, when it comes to these games, I enjoy the challenge that Jedi Grandmaster offers, but it's hard to feel like I'm actually being challenged when the main thing I'm fighting against isn't the timing of the enemy's attacks, but rather my sporadically tanking frames if I dared have the audacity of challenging a boss in the designated area they inhabited. Going off the meters provided in-game, you need to time your parry to the last 10% of an enemy's attack animation on the hardest difficulty. So I'm sure you can imagine how infuriating it would be to try and learn that timing, finally perfect said timing, just to have it not matter, but only some of the time, maybe. My fault for thinking the frame rate wouldn't fuck me this time, really. So, for bosses taking place in busier arenas, I'd lower the difficulty down to Jedi Master because that extra 20% on the parry window really helps sometimes. And as a bonus, it just flat out makes the game more accessible. Can't believe I'm saying that about an EA-published game of all things, but I guess when your company's philosophy boils down to how can we make the most money without the government stepping in, it makes some sense. Obviously, the easiest way to do that is to make a good game that tons of people want to play, and then make sure enough people are able to finish it so that they recommend the game to other people. Seems like a pretty simple concept, yet there are studios like From Software who forego things like difficulty settings in order to ensure that everyone who plays the game has the exact same experience. And while I can respect that getting good is a core part of that experience, it feels pretty shit when not being good at the game is out of my control. Whether it's due to something like performance issues, or in my girlfriend's case, carpal tunnel, something like a basic difficulty slider does fucking wonders for the overall player experience. If my girl's wrists are having a bad day, she straight up can't play these types of games with super tight parry windows because her hands aren't able to keep up with her brain. And that just compounds on the frustration because she knows she'd be able to do it if she just had like 4 extra frames, and I'm thankful that a game like Jedi Survivor is able to provide that for gamers like her. Someone might have the same experience I had playing on Jedi Grandmaster at the Jedi Knight difficulty, or sometimes gamers literally just want to engage with the story, so where's the harm in allowing them to do so? I get that not every game needs to be for everyone, but I think that applies more in terms of taste rather than accessibility. How is someone supposed to know whether a game is for them if they can't even play it in the first place? There's a huge difference between being told, this game isn't for you because you don't like Star Wars, and this game isn't for you because your body wasn't built right, and I think that's where a lot of the conversation gets lost on people. More often than not, players are most likely asking for difficulty options not because they don't want to engage with the challenge of the game, but because they want to engage with the game, period. Sure, there are mods if you have the equipment and know how to install them, but then people on consoles are just shit out of luck, and if someone has to go through a third-party website just to make a game playable, then that's a problem in my eyes. Look at Lies of P. It's one of my favorite games, and the first mod on Nexus is literally an unlock for the hidden easy mode that the devs implemented into the game but didn't give players access to. That's kind of fucked up, isn't it? Making an easier version of your game, presumably for level testing purposes, and then not even leveraging it as an accessibility option? Dude, that would have been huge for the Souls-like community, but I don't think we're ready to have that conversation yet, and at the end of the day, this is a fucking Star Wars video, so let's get back to talking about Star Wars, specifically the story. After a dope-ass cutscene to recap the previous game, Jedi Survivor opens with a shot of Cal and a prison escort on Coruscant, and right out the gate, we gotta talk about one of the biggest changes Survivor has made from Fallen Order. Cal has a beard now. Also, the Emperor turned the Jedi Temple into his palace. That's crazy. But then the ship begins its descent into the lower levels of Coruscant, where we're greeted with an absolutely incredible sense of scale. Buildings stacked on top of each other, neon signs galore. It almost feels like a Ghost Runner setting, and I can't get enough of it. So I wasn't complaining when we had to take a slow walk with our escort through the streets, granting us a glimpse into how the Empire has been treating citizens under their new reign. Seeing them close down streets, impose curfews, and even extort local shopkeepers for extra money. You know, just in case you forgot the space Nazis were the bad guys. Cal is brought before the senator, who takes his lightsaber and begins monologuing, which allows our boy BD-1 to enter the scene and do something to his ship. Once he's heard enough, Cal reveals that this was all part of his plan and breaks his restraints. Enter tutorial section. We filter through the senator's guards to relearn our combat basics along with force push and pull, and once he runs out of troops, the senator attempts to flee. So BD crashes that shit and we begin a trek to get the senator back. We're running through the streets of Coruscant's lower levels until we come across Bode, one of Cal's new allies, who rescues him from a stormtrooper. Seems like a chill dude, and he also introduces the new mechanic of aided combat, meaning that when you have an ally joining you on any stretch of the game, you're able to hold the right bumper and tell them to help out. I don't really have much of an opinion on the inclusion of this mechanic. It didn't show up too often, and whenever it did, I welcomed it as just another quick little thing to do every so often. Anyway, we continue onwards with Bode until we get ambushed by a security droid, which nets us another new upgrade to Cal's kit, the Ascension Hook. It's a new traversal tool that functions similarly to the Batman grappling hook, but only on specific points. It's fun, and while Cal's building it, we get to learn more about Bode, who joined Cal's crew as the newest member in order to try and make a better world for his daughter after they lost her mother to the Empire. Bode asks more questions about the rest of the crew, which helps establish Cal's connection with them, but also poses the nagging question in the back of your head, what happened to our friends from the last game? We'll get into that later though, we've got a senator to kidnap. Which we do after meeting up with the rest of Cal's crew and breaking into his yacht. We Jedi mind trick him into giving us the password to his terminal, pull his intel, and quickly learn that all the work Cal has supposedly done over the time skip hasn't even put a fucking dent in the Empire's regime. Job finished, we converse with the crew and make our way back to the Mantis. And I'd like to take this time to say I really appreciate the game showing us how far Cal has progressed with his Jedi training by just giving us access to Jedi mind trick during that conversation with the senator. It's nice to be shown new abilities rather than getting whole exposition dumps that... Right, this is Star Wars. Nothing's ever easy. Remember the ninth sister from the first game? Yeah, she's back again, and she killed the senator. Cool. Totally didn't need him for anything. But hey, at least we've got this stellar new crew to fight back against her. Oh, they're all dead. Really? Just like that, huh? Well, sounds like now is the best time to try and escape, so let's head through the meatpacking district. Here, we're introduced to the Confuse ability, which just uses Jedi mind tricks to briefly turn an enemy to your side. It's pretty fun, thanks, Seer. We eventually reach an Imperial outpost, and just as things start looking grim, Bode crashes the Senator's yacht to save our asses for a second time. This buys Cal enough time to crash the sister's ship, and now we have our first major boss fight against the ninth sister for the second time. Her moveset compared to the first game felt relatively similar, and I gotta say that while this is technically a reuse character, it's done incredibly well. Taking what was a mid-game boss fight in Fallen Order and throwing that same character at us for the first boss fight in Survivor shows exactly how much stronger Cal has gotten between the games by turning what used to be a decently difficult boss fight into something that could barely be considered a challenge. Especially when the game introduces our third stance, dual wielding. They blue-balled me with it in the first game, but I'm happy to say it's now got a fully fleshed out moveset, and I'm never taking this shit off. It even lets you auto-parry attacks with the trade-off of draining your force meter in case you're tired of pressing buttons. And once you bring the ninth sister's health bar to 0, Cal delivers the line, "Your name was Masana Tide, it's time to set you free," before fucking decapitating her? I see we're playing fast and loose with our definition of free here. After our fight, we regroup with the only surviving members of our squad, Bode and Bravo. After formulating a plan that boils down to, I just started blasting, we blast our way through the last of the Imperial troops to reach the Mantis. Cal gives Bode a way to track him down for payment before everyone flies out of here. Well, almost everyone. During their daring escape, Imperial TIE fighters intercept our heroes, and despite Cal's best efforts, Bravo goes down in a blaze of glory, letting Cal make his jump to light speed. Chase over, Cal begins to run diagnostics while BD plays some home videos. We see a glimpse of the crew's life on the ship back when it was just Cal, Seer, Grease, and Marin. Looked like they were all having a solid time exploring the galaxy. Wonder what happened. I'm sure we'll get to that soon, since the ship sustained pretty heavy damage and there's only one man in the galaxy that knows how to fix it. So Cal plots a course for Kobo, where Grease settled down, and off we go. Upon entering the Kobo system, we're greeted with some fire scenery, like this big mass of swirling energy next to an absolute unit of a planet. And as we begin our descent to Kobo, our ship's damages finally catch up. Wonderful. Bad news is we're crash landing. Good news is we're not that far from Grease's cantina. So we begin our trek across this new planet where we're introduced to some fun enemy types. Most notably the battle droids. I fucking love these guys. They're just so funny for no reason. If you ever find yourself in a position to just sit and observe the droid antics, I highly recommend it because these guys had me laughing out loud a few times. But what didn't have me laughing are the guys the droids are working for, the Bedlam Raiders. From what little information we can gather on them, they're a group of raiders bent on fucking with the prospectors in the area, going as far as killing them for seemingly no reason. Ain't shit they can do against the Jedi glow sticks though, meaning we can tear through their little patrol and start using these roller droids to make some progress. Path created, we get this little cutscene of BD-1 trying to scan a giant creature and almost eating shit before continuing onwards to a gorgeous vista overlooking Grease's cantina, Pyloon Saloon. We also meet Mosey, a stable hand that lives in the village. She gives us some directions, tells us to say hello to Doma in the village, and we're free to go meet up with our boy Greasy Money. Well, almost. As we reach Pyloon's, this creature gets thrown out the door in a classic Western bar fight altercation, and we get to meet Ravis, leader of the Bedlam Raiders and harasser of this poor little guy, Turgle. I say harasser, but in reality, it seems like the Raiders hired Turgle to find something for them and Turgle delivered false goods, or broken goods. Either way, Cal can't just let Ravis kill this frog, so he uses the Force to keep that from happening. Ravis takes notice, and rather than challenge us himself, he lets his underling Zeke take us on. This is technically a boss fight, but Zeke's literally just a normal enemy with a bigger health bar, so after mopping him up, Ravis leaves and we get to meet Doma. She runs a shop here and kinda has this motherly role that she takes over the entire outpost. I love her. So we enter the saloon where we get to meet the bartender, a droid named Monk. Honestly, I'd go to way more bars if all my bartenders were like Monk. He talks like somebody out of a 1920s speakeasy and gives off the vibes of someone you've known for years despite meeting him all of 5 seconds ago. Cal asks him where Grease is, and Grease comes out of the back since he was hiding from the Raiders. Can't blame him, I would too. He and Cal catch up, Grease being just as much of a dad as ever, and they eventually get to the point of reminiscing about the old days, aka the last game. And during this conversation, it's pretty evident that Grease has been pretty lonely on his own, to the point that he offers Cal free room and board at the saloon. Seeing as we've got literally nowhere else to go, might as well rest for once, right? So Cal heads downstairs where we can find his old scrapper outfit, not sure why Grease held on to it, and sleeps. Only to awaken to Grease watching him sleep, just like old times. Cal and Grease have a quick convo about Cal's feudal fight against the Empire, and Grease tells Cal that he's gotta find a place to call home because, coming from a former gambler, you gotta know when to walk away. But we didn't come here for life advice, we came for ship repairs. So Grease shows us the old smuggler's tunnels hidden under the cantina where we should be able to find ourselves a working gyro module. We take a quick trek through the underground, fight off some of the local pests, and find a gyro module. Then the floor collapses and we end up in an old Jedi temple. Cal isn't aware that's what this is yet, but I'm telling you so that I can talk about them. Outside of this first Jedi temple, they're an optional side objective that you can find around Kobo. They all have puzzles based on using Cal's different Force abilities in order to complete a challenge that will unlock perks for you. They're nothing special, and I can't say I found myself tracking them down outside of when I didn't feel like continuing the main story. I just treated them like any other side content, meaning that I refused to interact with them until I got bored of dealing with things like themes and character development. Speaking of, meet ZN-A4, aka Z. Through Cal's ability of psychometry, the power to relive an object's stored memories via the Force, we learn that she is an old Republic droid who served Centauri Kree, an old Jedi who wiped Z's memory banks of any info that related to a planet called Tanalorr, which can only be accessed by navigating something called the Kobo Abyss. We free Z, and as we do this, we learn that Tanalorr actually exists, and since Z can't make the journey herself, we need to head off to the forest array where the key to Tanalorr is supposedly being kept. We learn all this on our way back up to Pyloon's, where Bode has caught up with us. Seems like he and Grease are getting along well enough, so let's go check out that forest array while they fix the Mantis. Using Z's data disk to access the forest array, we're immediately greeted with a change of scenery that takes us from the dry, arid climate of Kobo to a lush, green forest full of wildlife that's also somehow on Kobo. just like the Empire. I love this level design, not just because it's something other than dirt or sand, but because the environment is perfectly utilized. There's a plethora of vines available for you to climb on, sections that require you to wall run upstream in order to avoid a slip and slide adventure, and even rock outcroppings you can manipulate with the Force. Making my way through this area the first time kinda gave me an Indiana Jones meets Star Wars vibe, which was just hammered home by meeting Toa. She's a Twi'lek that's fascinated with history and will tell you the locations of more Jedi temples across Koboh when you recruit her to Pyloons. Oh yeah, I should mention that you can recruit certain NPCs you come across to the saloon, which acts as a main hub for Cal. As we continue our journey through the forest, we come across Koboh dust. I don't really know how else to describe this stuff other than a sentient particle effect which chokes out any living organism that breathes it in for too long. I don't know where this stuff comes from, and it's not directly explained in-game, but I'm sure one of the many data entries will give you more info on it if that's what you're looking for. As a game mechanic, I don't really mind it. As the name implies, it's only on Koboh and doesn't show up very often as is. It's introduced as the main obstacle for the forest array, which we've now arrived at, and turns the location into a puzzle you need to solve via careful climbing and displacement of the Koboh dust by using lasers. Love lasers, especially when I can use them to burn away these solidified chunks of Koboh dust that are preventing me from finding the key to Tanalorr. Burning away the dust allows us to continue on our convoluted path through the array, and while cutting through a section of the forest, we come across some Imperial troops being bullied by a bile maw. So naturally, we hit it with the old Jedi mind trick, and we've now unlocked the ability to confuse large creatures, which definitely comes in handy. Once we've made it through those troops, we find this little guy overlooking a ravine that we currently don't have a way to cross. Naturally, this means it's time for a flashback to Cal and Cere having a conversation aboard the Mantis. More of an argument, really, as Cal wants to keep fighting against the Empire, while Cere would rather focus on restoring what's left of the Jedi Order, telling Cal that this isn't the time to fight, which Cal then uses to unlock the ability to tame flying animals. I wish I was making that up. I understand what they were going for here. They wanted to use that flashback to show Cal learning when the appropriate times for violence are, as well as give the player some insight to what happened with him and Cere between games. I actually really like this as a storytelling mechanic. It's a very efficient way to get lots of information across without feeling overly expository. Plus, this happens a few more times, and I really enjoy those, but this one specifically feels so out of place to me, purely because I can't get this image out of my head where Cal approaches this small, non-hostile creature, lightsaber in hand, and thinks to himself, damn, this is just like that time Cere told me to stop fighting the Empire. It's such a huge tonal juxtaposition that really caught me off guard, and maybe that's the point. Contrasting the seriousness of the Empire with a small winged animal definitely makes the scene stick in your head, so this could all just be brilliant writing that's going completely over mine, or I'm just reaching, but I'll cross that chasm when I come to it. And now that Cal's crossed his chasm, we can get back to entering the forest array, which we can accomplish by using another laser to burn away another chunk of Koboh dust, freeing this giant bird that I totally didn't forget to mention earlier. Feathered friend freed, we can finally access the array, where we take a quick elevator ride to the control room. Here we find a chamber, and upon activating it, it's revealed to be a Bacta tank housing some dude. Naturally curious, Cal taps into the memories via the Force, and we meet Dagan Gera, the Jedi Knight who discovered Tanalorr through flashback. This kicks off a neat little segment where we get to explore Tanalorr through Dagan's memories and learn a bit more about the planet. Mainly that it was an old Jedi temple hidden away in the aforementioned Koboh Abyss. It's also completely undetectable on modern maps and blocks all comm signals, making it the perfect safe haven. Hope you liked Treasure Planet, cause now that Disney owns Star Wars, all their box office flops are fair game for rehashing. We get to see Centauri Kree and Dagan talk about making Tanalorr the new Jedi Temple so long as the Council allows it. The flashback ends with hostile forces pulling up and starting a fight, where Dagan somehow notices Cal in his memories and demands to be released. So, of course, we release him. Why wouldn't we want to work with the guy who found Tanalorr to find Tanalorr? It's not like he views the Jedi Order as a bunch of idiots that all turned their backs on him, caused their own downfall, and left him to rot, right? Hey, what are you doing with that lightsaber? Ah, fuck, it's time for a boss fight, isn't it? Yeah, after Dagon's monologue, where we get this really cool scene of his lightsaber transforming from yellow to red as his dormant emotions flood back and reignite his passion for Tanalorr, it's time for a boss fight. And I gotta say, for a dude with one arm, this guy fights pretty damn well. That's not to say people with one arm can't fight, but I'm assuming he lost his dominant arm and then immediately got thrown into the hyperbolic bacta tank, so I don't think he ever had time to adapt to that, meaning he makes up for it by using the Force to supplement his attacks, which I personally think is super fucking cool. And the good news is, we'll get to see more of that, since before you're able to actually kill him, that guy Ravis pulls up to rescue him because he's got an oath to Dagon, go figure. I will say though, this is a pretty compelling way to set up an antagonist for the story. Immediately introducing a character that's looking for the same thing Cal is for different reasons is already fine enough, but purposefully not letting you finish the fight with him creates a personal grudge between the player and Dagon, which is the kind of storytelling I love to see in games. And with our antagonist gone, it's time for Cal to leave the forest array, where we use the same animal taming technique from earlier to ride these bipedal creatures that I'm totally not forgetting the name of. It's a pretty nice addition that makes Koboh a lot easier to traverse in case you don't feel like fast traveling via meditation circles. And why would you? With how varied the landscape of Koboh can get, there's always something to find, from the forest array to the Jawa settlement to the saloon, which we've now arrived at. Here, we learn that both the Mantis and Z have been repaired, and after catching Bode and Grease up on what we've learned, the new mission is to track down Dagon and learn how to reach Tanalorr. Cal manages to sweet-talk Grease into joining back up, since nobody knows the Mantis quite like he does, plus he cooks a mean fucking scaz steak. And with our boy Grease back, next up on the list is Seer, who's been operating on the planet Jedi. So off we go to find our friend and explore our newest destination. We land on Jedi, and you're never gonna believe this. It's all fucking sand. It is all fucking sand. I remember praising the first game for finally giving us a Star Wars story that doesn't feature a desert planet, so imagine how disappointed I was when I pulled up to this granular affront to the Force. But it's not Tatooine, so I'll give them points there. During the trip, we received a call warning us of a sandstorm because, of course, and that a guide would meet Cal at a rendezvous point to bring him to their headquarters. But as we crest the hill we'd landed at, we find that the Empire is also here, meaning we need to find that guide before the Imperials do. So we begin making our way through the opening area, which is revealed to be a floor is lava experience, where if you touch the sand for too long, big monsters eat you. Lovely. Though if you're more in the mood to do some meandering, you can find this thing called a Force Echo. These are fun little mini-games you can find scattered around the map, where it throws you into a challenge that upon completion rewards you with either XP, more health, or more force. I really appreciate the addition of these. They feel very rewarding, and none of the challenges feel too samey or overly difficult. Barring one, but I'll talk about that later. Maybe. Right now we're maneuvering through the ruins of this desert temple to find that guide, whose speeder has been located by both Cal and the stormtroopers. Naturally, we get a move on, but we're then ambushed by a jetpack trooper? Wait a minute.
They fly now!
They fly now? They fly now!
And after crashing into the sandslide, we're fighting Imperial troops with the assistance of, surprise, Merrin. That's right, everyone's favorite space witch is back, and she's somehow even more fine, oh my god. So after clapping their Imperial cheeks, we make our way back to Merrin's speeder, which immediately gets blown up by more stormtroopers. Now we have the problem of figuring out how to cross the desert before that storm hits. And if you look closely across this ravine, there's a very tall creature over there that may be able to give us a ride. So Cal and Merrin make their way towards it, and on the way we learn that Merrin's magic has grown, which is quite handy. We also learn that she's been busy exploring the galaxy, but swings by Jeddah to visit Seer every so often. Very sweet of her, but I can tell Cal's a tad upset about the exclusion. By now, we've reached the creature, called a Spammel. I love these goofy looking guys. Helps that they can cross the desert pretty quickly too. So we begin riding back to Seer's headquarters, listening to Merrin recount how she's seen most of the galaxy at this point, as the craziest sandstorm I've ever seen rapidly approaches. And by rapidly approaching, I mean it's literally on top of of us. This, of course, spooks the Spammel, throwing Cal and Marin into the sand and separating them. So we venture through the storm, stumbling upon some protected ruins currently inhabited by stormtroopers taking shelter from the sand. Unable to set aside our differences, we fight them, and in response they send in a fucking AT-ST, which we also destroy. Continuing onward, we reunite with the Spammel and Marin in a cave where we wait out the storm. Cal inquires about Marin's decision to leave the group, where she informs us that she'd wanted to explore the galaxy in her own way in order to find herself. Fair enough, we love a soul-searching journey. They share a cute moment together, and in the morning we finish our journey to Seer's base. And upon arriving, who should greet us but fucking Eno Cordova? I thought this dude was dead based on how cryptic he seemed in the first game, but BD1 is happy to see him, so I am too. Welcome to the team, my man. Turns out he and Seer have been operating in a cave system run by the Hidden Path, a secret organization dedicated to helping the Jedi, which we are. Cordova and Marin head off to greet the Mantis while Cal catches up with Seer. She tells us that she's been working with the Hidden Path in an attempt to restore the Jedi archives, while also aiding former Jedi in their attempts to seek refuge from the Empire. And we get this really great moment where Cal recognizes that being upset with Seer and Marin for leaving the group was a bit irrational, and he actually owns up to his mistakes. He then catches Seer up on the whole Tanalor thing, recruiting her and Cordova to help find it, with Cordova pointing us to one of Kobo's moons that houses a laboratory. Seems like a great place to start, so we head back to the Mantis where Bode gives us the greatest gift of all, a fucking gun. We've now unlocked Blaster Stance, which would be the most broken thing in this game if it weren't for the sole fact that enemies are able to dodge your shots. Even then, it's mainly bosses that actually dodge, which just hammers home that this stance was intended to play more of a crowd control role, especially when you progress further and unlock different charge shots for it like the Ricochet mod. Regardless, we're strapped to the stars, meaning we can head to our next destination, the Shattered Moon. And I can't think of a better descriptor for this moon other than shattered, so I won't. Upon arrival, you can tell that this place has history and you want to learn more about it. If only the game didn't actively encourage you to spend as little time here as possible, since out of every location we visit, this is the one with the worst performance issues. Shattered Moon? More like shattered frames, dude. Holy shit, I think I can hear my graphics card getting ready for takeoff. It's actually so disappointing because I was enraptured with its mythos from the jump. The first hallway you walk into, you're ambushed by the raiders, telling you that there's something here they don't want you to find. Speaking with the abandoned maintenance droids scattered around will give you cryptic dialogue that implies something terrible happened here, but the answer as to what actually happened seems to elude you, meaning if you want those answers, you'll have to look elsewhere. If the game just wasn't hampered down by poor performance, this would be my favorite location in the game. And I'm sure that by the time this video is out, those issues either have been or will be fixed, so maybe your first impressions here are better than mine. I hope that's the case, but we've got other things to talk about. Mainly the introduction of a new enemy, the Magna Guard. It's literally just another spear-type enemy, with the caveat that they're robotic and can continue operating without their heads. I feel like this was just Respawn's way of sneaking decapitation into a Star Wars game without sacrificing that T rating, but I'm not complaining. It's a cool enemy design regardless of what their motives are. Plus, we'll be seeing plenty more of them, especially as we venture through the base, which is falling apart at the seams. This creates an incredible amount of sections that you need to use your movement abilities to traverse, almost turning the game into a pseudo 3D platformer at times. And upon reaching the end of this segment, we find an old High Republic device that Z probably knows something about, as well as this bounty hunter that ambushes Cal for a mini boss fight. Aside from his little invisibility gimmick, it's a pretty easy fight, and defeating him unlocks your third and final lightsaber stance, Crossguard. I'm actually surprised at how well this stance was implemented, if I'm being honest. With the other four stances all focusing on fast flurries of attacks, you'd expect the Crossguard stance to do the same, but no, it actually has weight. Somehow. Seriously, I don't understand how Respawn managed to make swinging a glorified glow stick feel like I'm wielding a Knight's Claymore, but holy shit, it works. There's a mandatory crossguard section that you need to go through, but prior to that, you get to listen to a force memory of Centauri Kree and Dagan discussing their first voyage to Tanalor. In this, we pick up that Dagan had a retreat on Kobo, so once we make it back to the Mantis, that's our next destination. So we're back on Kobo again, where Pyloons is popping a lot more than when we first arrived. I know it's a small thing, but I really like it when games that have a sort of central hub put in the effort to make that place gradually come to life as the game progresses. successes, especially when they tie that growth into a reward for exploring the game, which Survivor does by introducing us to Scuva Stev, the best character in this game. He's a tiny, and I mean tiny, fisherman that speaks with a Scottish accent for some reason. After meeting him, you'll be able to find him around the explorable planets at various bodies of water where, upon speaking to him, he'll catch a fish for the saloon's aquarium before regaling you with a tale from his past as any old fisherman would. I can't stress just how much this goofy little creature significantly improved my gameplay experience. Like, it got to a point that regardless of what I was doing, if I found water, I was looking for Scuva Stev. He was just such a breath of fresh air from when the trials and tribulations of fighting a fascist regime caught up to me, and I just wanted to hear about this little bastard's fishing stories. I love him. Anyway, fish aren't what we came here for, it's Dagon's resort. So we finish catching up with the main crew, where we learn that Bode has always been more of a lone wolf type, and that this is his first time being part of a team. Cool, dude. Hope that doesn't come back to bite me in the ass later. We also learn from Z that the resort is located past the Raiders' settlement near the saloon. So after passing through the base, we get to fly across this massive gorge to reach the resort, where we're immediately ambushed by yet another bounty hunter. And if you're wondering why so many bounty hunters seem to have a raging hard-on for Cal, I mean, just look at them. On a real note, though, the reason we have so many bounty hunters after us is because of that little stunt we pulled with the Haxian Brood back in the first game. Turns out the guy that runs it is still pissed about that, so he's been sending bounty hunters to get his revenge. So what are we meant to do about it? That's where Cage steps in, who propositions Cal with the task of hunting down the bounty hunters, rather than waiting for them to find us. And while it's just another side quest, it does give you blaster upgrades and cosmetics if you choose to go hunting. Plus, the end of this questline has a really cool cutscene that I'm not going to spoil here, so if you want to see it, then I guess you gotta play the game. Or just look it up on YouTube, I'm not your dad. Back to the task at hand, reaching Dagon's resort. With any sort of footpath seemingly collapsed into the hot magma below, we must puzzle our way to the top by using the force ball mechanic to activate lasers so that we can use the flying creatures to reach a slightly higher elevation where we rinse and repeat until we've reached the top. Normally, I'd complain about how repetitive and tedious this is, but with the addition of a new BD1 mechanic, it feels fresh enough to warrant dedicating this section to it. The new mechanic in question is the Kobo Grinder, which allows BD to produce streams of Kobo dust that can be connected from a laser to a chunk of solidified dust in order to burn it. The only real gripe I have with this is that sometimes the paths you create get gaps during the spray animation, which got kind of annoying in some of the Jedi puzzle chambers that required you to create longer paths. But again, that's just side content, and nothing like this really happens in the main story, so it's chill. Plus, who's gonna complain about a new mechanic when it's introduced alongside views like this? And now that we've reached the top, it's time for another boss fight against a raider with a lightsaber. Which begs the question, where the fuck are they getting these? Did Dagon pop out of that Bacta tank and start up a black market or some shit? Why does every boss have a lightsaber now? It's not like we haven't fought bosses that don't have lightsabers, so is this just a thing that's supposed to be a sign of raider prestige? Exploit enough prospectors and get a shiny saber? I genuinely don't get it, and this doesn't get explained, so what the fuck is going on here? Anyway, once we've finished off that raider, we can explore the ruins of this retreat and find a second High Republic data disk, which means it's time to head back to Jeddah to show it to Cordova. And on the way back to the Mantis, you can find Bima and Thule, two new NPCs you can recruit to the saloon. They run the Holotactics minigame, which allows you to build a database based on the enemies you've defeated and then pit them against opponents in a simulated battle for rewards like cosmetics or collectibles. This is such a fantastic way to incentivize players to take more fights in a game based on combat, because the only way to get better troops for Holotactics is to fight more challenging enemies, and the only way to find challenging enemies is to either explore or progress through the game. Speaking of which, we're back at the Mantis, meaning it's time to go explore more Jeddah. So we arrive at the Hidden One's base and give the two devices we found to Cordova. However, both of them appear to have been damaged by a lightsaber. Thanks, Gara. At the same time, we learn that the Empire is currently closing in on a refugee safe house, so naturally Cal volunteers to go with Marin to save their skins. After spammeling through the desert, we reach the Pilgrim Sanctuary just as the Empire does. Marin takes us along the back route in hopes of beating the Empire in this race against time to find the refugees, specifically Brother Armai, who has some info that Seer needs. In order to buy some time, Marin splits off to stall the Empire, which leaves us to traverse the area on our own. This leads us to a section occupied by dangerously high winds, two stormtroopers, and a security droid. Surprising to absolutely nobody, the winds are the most dangerous thing here, as we can't move on until we've figured out a way to block said winds. And the way we do this is by using the Force to pull these gigantic blocks from the wall that emit a music-like sound as the wind whistles through them, which adds a nice eerie backing track to your various parkour stunts as you continue onwards to our next obstacle, the DT Sentry Droid. I fucking hate these things. Not because they're massively tanky, but because they come equipped with this bullshit helicopter attack that for some reason can't be parried. Deal enough damage though, and the problems literally remove themselves from the equation, which is both nice and funny, as you now get to watch these hulking machines desperately try to headbutt and kick you once they've lost their arms. Once we've done that, we can get back to climbing, and may I just say, I love the implementation of these ridiculously high wind speeds as both an obstacle and an assistance tool. Depending on where you're attempting to go, you can use those winds to propel yourself towards it, making jumps that are otherwise impossible. Speaking of impossible, meet Peely, the character you just can't hate. They're a character that just cares about plants, making them a fine addition to our collection of NPCs at the saloon. Peely opens up the gardening minigame on the roof of Pyloons, which is nice, but I didn't find myself interacting with it as much as I might have liked to, probably due to the way you find seeds being tied to destroying plants with a lightsaber, which feels incredibly antithetical to cultivating life, but I guess in order for life to be gained, something has to be lost. And while I could extrapolate on that a bit more, I'm just gonna tell you to watch Full Metal Alchemist and I'll get on with the story. We reunite with Marin, who did her best to stall the Empire, but alas, the Empire is still here. And with both forces essentially at the refugees' doorstep, it's all a matter of who can cross this bridge first. Unfortunately for Cal, these gaps are too windy for him to jump across, so after opening this old room and jumping into it, we get another flashback to earn a new ability. Within this flashback, it's another conversation between Cal and Seer, and while I can't quite remember the specifics of their conversation, it culminates with Seer telling Cal that he needs to slow down on his fight with the Empire before he gets himself killed. Naturally, Cal responds by unlocking the Jedi Dash, which uses the Force to propel himself forward at such ludicrous speeds that nothing aside from solid matter can interrupt his momentum. I will say that this use of a flashback to unlock an ability feels way more appropriate to the situation at hand than the previous one, especially since it's making use of the mentor-mentee trope to show that mentors aren't always correct with the wisdom they impart. With Seer's lesson amounting to Cal needing to slow down and formulate a plan before taking on the Empire, it's a nice juxtaposition seeing Cal figure out a way to bypass those same obstacles in his own headstrong way in a solid form of symbolism. Or maybe the curtains are just fucking blue, man, what do I know? After unlocking the dash is when I feel the game truly comes alive as the level design opens up immensely with this new ability. The devs were able to get really creative with how they designed their platforming segments, creating little puzzles that have an obvious route of approach but contain ways to bypass the intended routes in whatever sort of flashy force-based fashion you desire. And with this new ability unlocked, we've finally reached the Pilgrim Sanctuary, a structure that's beautiful both inside and out, using gorgeous stonework complemented by an ancient art style which gives the whole place a vibe of having some rich history. All for it to be destroyed under the cold, metallic claw of the Imperial drill, just in case making the bad guys literal space Nazis wasn't evil enough for you. We make our way underwater, dodging the drill and using the Force to open yet another door where we can find a Force echo of Brother Armai aiding refugees in their escape but staying behind himself. So then, where is Brother Armai? Good news, he's just in the next room over. Bad news, as soon as he hands Cal the contact codes that Seer needed, the drill crashes through the roof and kills him. R.I.P. Brother Armai, you were a real one for all 30 seconds of screen time you got. With the situation looking even more dire than before, Marin shows up to give Cal a charm that allows him to dash through these green force fields that you've probably seen around the map. Fun fact, dashing through these green force fields resets your dash and double jump, allowing for even more movement expression. Let's fucking go, dude. So we use these provided obstacles to continue running from the drill with Marin, fighting our way through caves full of stormtroopers until we hit a dead end. Sick. Marin seems to have an idea and asks Cal if he trusts her, to which he obviously responds yes, to which she responds by kissing him. Cute moment, but we've got way bigger problems right now. Turns out Marin's plan is to open up portals that she and Cal can fly through to evade the drill while crossing the giant chasm, giving us this insanely cinematic sequence where we pop out of portals, dodge drill bits, and overall just looks sick as hell. Sure, you could level the criticism that it's just a glorified QuickTime event, but when it looks and feels the way this does, how can I complain? The sequence ends with Marin and Cal taking this drill down in spectacular fashion before heading back to the Anchorite Temple, formerly known as the Hidden One's base of operations. Cal hands Seer her contact codes and informs her of Armai's untimely demise before going to catch up with Bode and Cordova, who have managed to dig up a little more info on Tanalorr. Turns out Centauri Kree built something called the Abyssal Compass, which is intended to help travelers navigate the Kobo Abyss safely. Naturally, this becomes our next target since it seems like there's a way to reach Tanalorr without having to interact with Dagon. But naturally, we need to go back to Kobo so that we can ask Z about this compass. Bonus, Marin decides to join up with us on this one while Seer and Cordova remain behind to continue their work. We land on Kobo, and before we're able to go speak with Z, Turgle comes running up screaming about how the Raiders kidnapped Z. Remember, this is Star Wars. Nothing is ever easy. Naturally, we gotta go get her back, and we've got Bode tagging along while Marin stays behind to keep an eye on the saloon. Bode heads off to scout, so we venture out to catch up at the swamp because of course there's a swamp level. We meet up with Bode where he points out what he's found, giving our current mission a sort of infiltration vibe that I love to see in a Jedi-based game. Speaking of things I love to see, the Raider base. Kind of. I'll be real, I only like this thing because it looks like a menacing Epcot ball. Probably why they set this level in a swamp now that I think about it. I'd make the joke that it's meant to be camouflage since the rest of this area is colored with various shades of gray, beige, and... yeah, that's it, just gray and beige. But given how fucking massive this Epcot ball is, I don't think that's the case. Oh, well, at least they don't make us trudge through swamp muck. Instead, you get to glide and zipline your way through the swamp while Bode just takes off on his jetpack, lucky bastard. Along the way to the base, we can meet Zig, a frequent customer at Pyloon's, talking to Winnie, who seems to have lost her datapad in a bird's nest. We volunteer to try and retrieve it, but we do not yet possess the required ability to do so, meaning we move on and come back later. So let's get into that Epcot ball, or Lucre Hulk as the Raiders call it. Whack color palette aside, this place is pretty fun to navigate. At the start. Unfortunately, much like the Shattered Moon, the Lucre Hulk is plagued with these same frame rate issues that just ruin the vibe for me. And while I could at least look past that in some parts of the Shattered Moon, setting the Lucre Hulk in a visually uninteresting swamp was really just the nail in the coffin for any sort of enjoyment I could have pulled out of this place. Upon entering the actual base, we get introduced to a couple new enemies, such as the Droideka and the Raider Hammer Guy. The Droidekas have shields to tank reflected blaster fire, meaning you'll need to find openings or create your own, provided you're fighting with a companion, while the Hammer Guy just has a really fucking big hammer. It hurts. But after taking down our newfound foes, we get access to the Yurt Zone, where I will once again complain about the frame rate. Not because there's nothing to talk about, but because I am trying my goddamn best to not skip this whole section out of spite. So, fuck the performance issues, the yurts are cool though, and after beating bandits in their bedrooms, we reach the troop dispensary platform, which isn't a boss fight, but more of a wave-based combat section that's kinda hard for like, no reason. And while I'm sure that's a legit skill issue on my part, I'm sure you can all guess what I'll blame it on, so let's move along. Once the dispensary has been smoked out, Cal and Bode have a bit of a heart-to-heart conversation, in which Bode attempts to give Cal advice about Marin. Real bro shit, you know? But that convo gets cut short when the two get separated by a barrier, leaving Bode to go find a way out on his own while we go find Z. We begin sneaking through the ventilation only to get ripped through the wall by none other than our old buddy Ravis. He snatches our data disk, which is rude as hell, but not as rude as trying to kill Cal, which I'm sure he would have succeeded at if it weren't for my boy BD1 fucking decking this guy with a shipping container. Thanks, buddy. And after a quick lightsaber ride to the bottom of the ventilation chamber, we immediately enter another flashback scene. This one details one of Cal and Seer's old adventures where Cal watches Seer decimate a squadron of stormtroopers before dropping an elevator full of them to the bottom of the shaft via force. Meaning we too now have access to Force Slam, as well as Force Lift, because if you can send things down, then you should be able to send things up as well. And with these new abilities unlocked, there's no better time to learn how to use them than the present. So we make our way through maintenance in order to get topside again, and once we do, we're off to find an elevator that can bring us to where Z's being held. And once we've found a way onto that elevator, we get to eavesdrop on a conversation between Dagon and Ravis, where Ravis attempts to convince Dagon that Cal is actually a threat. But Gara has one hell of an ego and doesn't seem to take Ravis seriously, sending him on another mission to the Shattered Moon, since that's apparently where the last copy of the compass is. We also learn that Dagon still plans to reprogram Z, and we can't let that slide, meaning the rescue mission is still on. Atop the tower, we find Z being held for reprogramming, so we begin to free her when Dagon shows up and it's time for another boss fight. I gotta say, I love the arena here. You're fighting on this circular platform suspended way above the ground while Z dangles in a bunch of cables from the ceiling, giving a sense of urgency to the fight itself. On the topic of said fight, Dagon's moveset is mostly the same as the first time you fought him, but with a couple new tricks thrown in. It's a good fight, but once again, he escapes before we're able to end this. So, after he runs off, we finish freeing Z and fill her in on the whole compass thing, since that piece of info was purged from her memory. And with that done, it's time to leave the Lucre Hulk. Except we can't quite walk out the front door, meaning the only way out is via escape pod. Fine for Bode and Z, but if you played the first game, then you might remember that Cal has a bit of history with escape pods, so you can imagine that having to relive those memories was quite painful for him. But after the escape pod lands, we find ourselves back in the swamp where we can now retrieve Winnie's datapad, which is unfortunately damaged beyond repair. We give her the remains, and she tells us we'll see her back at Pyloon's, which we're also heading to. What a coincidence. And while I was on my way back, this is where I spent an ungodly amount of time doing side quests on Kobo, which I believe is due to how incredibly intentional the planet's level design felt. From the moment you crash land on this planet, you're faced with areas gated off by force abilities you haven't unlocked, which creates an incentive to come back later when you do have said abilities, provided you remember where they are. But given how often you end up retreading old paths, the game is constantly reminding you of where these things are and encouraging you to explore any other areas you might not have checked out yet in pursuit of more secrets. My favorite of these being the Fonky Caves, Caverns, you know what I mean. I debated on whether or not I should talk about this in depth due to spoilers, but let's be real, you've made it this far into the video where I'm spoiling the whole story, so do you really care? Plus, I've got nothing but time here, so I can make these videos as long as I want. Either way, I'll make it quick. The Fonky Caves are structured over a multitude of levels that take you to 3 different raiders hiding behind electrified doors, plus a Rancor on the second floor because fuck you, why wouldn't one be here? And while the various levels all contain plenty of chests for you to find, it also contains the puzzle mechanic of throwing these angry orange blobs around and using their corrosive acid to progress through the caves. You're also given the choice of using these things to fight each raider one-on-one, or if you're feeling bold, you can make your way to the end of the caves and fight all 3 of them at the same time in the world's most cramped arena. I can't lie, this whole area impressed the hell out of me. It felt like something that could have taken a whole story mission on its own, but it's completely optional. Like, none of this pertains to the main story, you just have to stumble upon it on your own. It's like a small-scale version of the Siofra River in Elden Ring. Seriously, if you skipped this on your playthrough for some reason, go back and finish it, because I think it deserves more appreciation. And after spelunking through the world's funkiest cave system, we can get back to the Mantis and chase after Ravis on the Shattered Moon. As we pull up to said moon, we're met with vulture droids patrolling the area. With the Mantis unable to land while they're out and about, Marin pulls an old trick out of her bag and makes the ship invisible so that we can land and let Cal go about his business. And while landing, we notice that the array on the moon is active, which gives us a pretty clear starting point. We make our way to the array while Grease worries about the vulture droids, and upon entering, guess what spots the Mantis? With what feels like a clock on us, we need to navigate the array while Grease outruns the droids to the best of his abilities. Navigating the array, however, consists of dodging the massive laser that occupies the area. In case you didn't hear that, there's a giant fucking laser in here. Oh my god, I love this thing so much. I don't care if my frames are tanking harder than Tiananmen Square. This thing is so cool. The sound it makes when it fires, the visuals, the fact that you can just throw enemies into it and watch them get atomized. Everything about it is pure spectacle, which is only enhanced when you get to the section where you step outside and get a cool shot of the mantis evading those vultures. Unfortunately, the spectacularity can't continue as we've got to listen to Ravis's monologue since he's got us held captive in the laser chamber with a surround sound speaker system. He just goes on and on about the past, and I'd love to recount it for you, but unfortunately I was too busy trying to dodge the giant laser to really pay attention to him, so that's my bad. Next time I'll be sure to read the subtitles instead of fighting for my life. But by the time his monologue ends, we've reached the center of the array, which is a circular room with very limited options for traversal. So, exploring what we can, we eventually find a workshop that initiates another cutscene, but this time focusing on Centauri and Dagon. Centauri is guarding a compass, and Dagon wants it for obvious reasons. He attempts to push past her, and in response, Kree cuts Gara's arm off. Glad we figured out how he lost it, and it explains why he doesn't seem to like Kree despite working so closely with her in the past. In this same workshop, we can find an upgrade for our ascension cable, which allows us to bounce off these floating balloons around the area. There's so much I could say about this mechanic, but y'all have probably gathered how I feel about anything that increases movement and expression, so I'll just say that it's fun and move on while Cal moves up. And at the top of this balloon-laden path, we finally find Ravis, who launches into yet another monologue, except this time it's a cutscene, so I'm cool with it. We learn that he hates the Jedi Order for how they betrayed Dagon and denied him of a warrior's death by refusing to kill him. Obviously. He ends it by telling Cal that if we want more information, we'll have to fight him for it. Sounds like a fair deal to me, let's throw hands. And my god, does he ever. This is probably my favorite boss fight in the game by like a country mile, because Ravis fights like a goddamn warrior. He wields this staff club thing that has a detachable head which he throws around the room if you get pushed too far back, rockets and blaster fire to keep up the pressure, and a good amount of gap closers to make sure the fight never truly stops. That's not to say it's an oppressive fight by any means. There's still plenty of opportunity to heal up and breathe, especially in the first phase. But the second phase, that's where things really pick up because Ravis finally starts taking the fight seriously. I know it's an overplayed trope where a real big enemy loses because they got too cocky, but I love it so much, dude. Especially in Ravis's case, because it's not like he starts playing more defensively or anything to try and win. He just gets even more aggressive, which I didn't think was possible. And it's during this fight that I noticed something on my many runbacks. Ravis doesn't block any of your attacks. Up until this point, if you swung your saber at anything with a weapon, they'd block it. Not Ravis though. He straight up tanks any attack you throw at him and keeps his own going because he just doesn't care. The body under his armor seems to be constantly regenerating, meaning we can't seem to hurt him in a way that matters. But he can't regenerate forever, meaning we can beat him. And upon doing so, he honors his word and spills more info about where the compass is. Afterwards, Cal attempts to offer Ravis a spot on the team since we defeated him, to which Ravis responds by telling Cal that only one of us will reach Tanalorr and demands his warrior's death, to which Cal obliges. With Ravis out of the picture, we take a dope-ass parkour route back to the Mantis and jet back to Kobo. On the way there, Cal seems incredibly distraught over the Jedi Code, especially seeing what happened to Dagon after he abandoned it, implying that Cal sees himself falling down the same path as Gara given how hard he's been focused on finding Tanalorr, which is compounded on in the following cutscene where Cal tells Merrin that he doesn't want to end up like Dagon. Merrin assures Cal that he won't, as Cal may be stubborn, but he's not driven purely on ambition like Gara is, leaving us with the quote, "A shared dream is not so easy to wake from." Interpret that as you will. I'd do it for you, but I'd rather talk about what happens next when Merrin tells Cal that if he were to ever stray too far from his path, his friends would be there to pull him back. I love how heavily this emphasizes the found family aspect of these games, while also painting Dagon as a foil to Cal even more than before, highlighting that while two people may have the same goal in mind, an actual support system can make a world of difference in how the journey to that goal can unfold. And now we're back on Kobo, hot on Dagon's heels. We learn that he's headed for Kree's observatory located on top of a mountain, meaning we now have to climb a mountain. And what better place to begin a climb than at the base of the mountain? It's a gray, foggy expanse, and while I disliked the Lucrehulk for that reason, I think it actually works here, mainly due to the atmosphere. With the paths here twisting and turning, you never really know what you might find around the next bend. Maybe some stormtroopers, local wildlife, giant monsters. How about a crashed Imperial shuttle? The real answer is that you can find all of the above, with the crashed shuttle taking priority number 1. So, after making our way to said shuttle and taking out the troops sent to secure it, we do the only natural thing we can and climb inside despite it being both on fire and perched on a cliff ledge. But it's all worthwhile as the cockpit of the ship contains our final upgrade for BD-1, the Electro Dart. I'll tell you more about it in a second, cause right now the ship is careening over that cliff edge. After narrowly escaping and scolding our boy, we get to see what the Electro Dart is all about. Essentially, BD can fire it at these glowing energy supplies to short-circuit them, allowing Cal to access areas further up the mountain. So up we go until we reach the hangar of an Imperial base that they have built within this mountain. God, I hate the Empire. And this is where the next challenge lies, for as you enter the base, you're greeted with waves upon waves of progressively more difficult enemies, with the fight culminating in a showdown against 2 DT droids at the same time, with jetpack troopers assisting. Straight up, this might be the hardest sequence of the game, at least in my opinion. It's such a gauntlet, especially when playing on Grandmaster difficulty. By the time I finally got through it, I had no heals and like 1 HP. It was brutal. But I did it, made my way up the elevator, mind-tricked the guard to let me through, and continued my journey, which was almost ended by none other than Rick, the door technician. Here's how that went down. Yeah, so he's a gimmick boss that goes down in 1 hit. I was laughing so hard at this on my first playthrough that I genuinely had to set the controller down to get a hold of myself. It's such a genius piece of game design in my eyes, making you struggle through hordes of the toughest enemies you've faced up to this point, not giving you a meditation circle, and then throwing a whole boss health bar at you just for said boss to die in 1 attack. That's hilarious, dude. Anyway, back to the mountain. We continue our climb, and do you remember back towards the beginning of this video when I was talking about that incredible sense of scale in Coruscant? Take a look at this shit. God, I love this game. And now that we're above the clouds, we can see the Raiders and Imperials battling it out for control of the observatory, which unfortunately makes it our problem too, as we need to climb it. We begin an absolutely massive parkour sequence to enter the observatory, and I'm sure this would have been cooler if, say it with me now, the frame rate was stable. Seriously, the environment here is so pretty with the views out into the horizon of Kobo and the sleek technological look of this observatory. I thoroughly enjoyed the place, I just wish it ran better. As we near the top of the observatory, we meet back up with Bode, who joins us on our journey to stop Dagon. We fight through more rooms of enemies as we enter and ascend the observatory, observing some nifty set pieces along the way. Once we finally reach the top, it's time for what is hopefully our final showdown with Gara, cause 3rd time's the charm, right? It better be, cause Bode's coming into this one too. Our duo enters to find Dagon watching an old holotape of Centauri Kree before he launches into his own speech about how he believes Tanalorr would have been worth sacrificing the Order for, and how he wishes to build his own empire once he reaches his destination. He calls Cal a failure, and the boss fight begins. And I gotta say, what a fucking fight, dude. It starts out as a 3-way pause. It starts out as a 2-want pause. Cal and Bode jump this motherfucker like it's an episode of Jujutsu Kaisen. There we go. Since this is the first time a companion has been available in a boss fight, it feels a lot more fresh out the gate, which is a good thing since this is our 3rd time fighting this edgelord. But that freshness flies out the door once Dagon reaches his 2nd phase and locks the fuck in, taking Bode out of the fight and using the Force to take himself and Cal to the ceiling. He then proceeds to manifest the Force into solid matter, giving himself his missing arm back, which feels like cheating to me, but whatever, dude, it looks dope as hell. We continue our one-on-one with Dagon, where he starts using way more Force-based attacks to keep you on your toes. And once you reach the end of his health bar, a cutscene plays where Cal takes a massive hit from Gara, letting him tap into Cal's emotions, where he proceeds to call Cal weak for refusing to embrace them. So Cal stands up and uses what I'm assuming is the full potential of his Force Echo thing to become Centauri Kree, throwing Dagon off his game and allowing Cal to drive a lightsaber through his chest, ending this once and for all. We've got the compass, so naturally Cal and Bode begin to discuss Tanalorr since it's finally within reach. Cal pitches using the planet as a way to start the Jedi Order back up as a safe place to train new Padawans, and Bode seems oddly upset by that idea. I assume he just wanted it to be a little safe haven for him, his daughter, and his newfound friends, so I get where he's coming from. Either way, we need to get this compass back to Cordova so he can take a look at it. We are now on Jeddah. Much to my disappointment, it is still sand. But we give the compass to Cordova, and despite there being some damage, it's fixable, which is just the dub we needed right now. BD and Cordova head off to repair said compass, while Marin takes the rest of the crew to a vista overlooking the desert where they relax and celebrate for once. Cal pitches the idea of making Tanalorr into the Hidden Path headquarters to Seer, and she seems in. Grease and Marin bring out some refreshments, everyone toasts to Tanalorr, and then we get some touching character moments via cutscene. First, Cal and Bode have another bro talk where Bode lets us know how much he misses his daughter before asking Cal if he'd want to go to Tanalorr first, just the two of them to scout it out. Cal politely declines, so Bode heads off to record a bedtime story for his kid. Cute. Now it's Marin's turn to have a one-on-one with Cal, and coincidentally, I think this is the first time they've been alone together since they kissed at the drill fight. Cal starts talking about how now that the Order is gone, he's not sure if there's a purpose in following its code to a T. All this just for him to confess his feelings for Marin. About goddamn time, it only took him 2 whole games. Jokes aside, I understand that the most likely reason we never developed an actual relationship between Cal and Marin in the first game is because it would have A, felt incredibly rushed, and B, Cal was still trying to follow the Jedi Order, which is strictly against romantic relationships, especially since we all know what happened the last time a Jedi fell in love. Cal and Marin's moment ends with a fade to black, take that as you will, and we cut to the next morning where we get to check on Cordova's progress. Good news, he's fixed the compass. Bad news, the alarms are blaring. The fucking Empire found us? How could this happen? Then the camera pans and my jaw dropped. For there stands Bode, gun to Cordova, in the midst of betraying us. I don't know about you guys, but the reveal that Bode had been working for the Empire this entire time came out of left field. Just like this blaster bolt came out of left field for Cordova. Yeah, that's way too soon. Seeing as Bode's killed Cordova and stolen the compass to reach Tanalorr, it only makes sense to hunt him down in an epic speeder chase across the desert. Scripted as it is, there are still some really cool moments, like when Cal uses the Force to throw a stormtrooper into the path of an oncoming TIE fighter. Overall, it's just a fun section fueled by rage and betrayal as you chase down the son of a bitch who sold you out and killed BD's dad. The chase culminates when we corner Bode atop some ruins where he proceeds to pull out a red lightsaber because he's been a Sith this whole time? In all honesty, I'm pretty sure he just took Dagon's lightsaber after we killed him. Regardless, he is a Force user with a red lightsaber, meaning it's time for a boss fight that we're meant to lose. I promise I'm not bad at the game. We get a cutscene where Bode throws Cal off the top of this very tall arena they're fighting on, and it ends when Cal passes out. So you press the respawn button like you've grown so accustomed to after getting waxed by a boss, and you're playing as Seer now. It makes sense. Cal's unconscious, but things are still happening, and I'd rather see what went down rather than have somebody tell me that cool things happened. And oh boy, does cool shit happen. While playing as Seer, you work alongside Marin and the Hidden Path as they do their best to hold off the tsunami of stormtroopers pouring in on them. I think my favorite part about this sequence is that regardless of what difficulty you're playing on, it does a great job of making you feel powerful, and that's gotta be intentional. What better way to show the difference between a Jedi Knight and a Jedi Master than to let you play as both and physically feel that gap, when Seer effortlessly rips a dropship out of the sky as you remember Cal struggles to lift a large creature. Meanwhile, Seer is dismantling squadrons and launching bombs at AT-ATs like it's just another Tuesday. But we're eventually pushed back inside as the numbers get too overwhelming, and in a desperate attempt to buy some time, Seer collapses the hangar's entrance. That seems to do the trick, so Grease and Marin start getting the Mantis ready to get the hell out, while Seer goes to grab what she can of the archives before they're destroyed again. So we hightail it to the archives and start downloading as much as we can when all of a sudden I hear the scratchy, aggravated breathing of a bitch who hates sand just as much as I do. Hello there, Vader. I wasn't expecting you to show up here, but Seer dropped a notion on him in the last game, and if there's one thing Vader won't let go of, it's a grudge. So it's time for a boss fight against Vader, and it fucking rules. Seer sends BD to the Mantis with the downloaded data, and then squares off against the most powerful Force wielder in existence. You cannot tell me that isn't cool as hell. It helps that this fight is incredibly cinematic with the iconic saber crosses, dialogue shared between the two as the fight happens, and then entering a second phase after Seer drops a whole fucking bookshelf on Vader, to which he responds by simply standing back up and continuing to fight while on fire. I love everything about this, especially the detail where Vader's attacks grow more ferocious and brutal as his health bar depletes. Speaking of that health bar, it is a cruel fucking joke that they let you get it as low as it goes, because obviously we can't kill Vader, meaning there's only one way this plays out, and it unfortunately involves the age-old trope of the hero's journey where the mentor character fucking dies. Like I said, this is Star Wars. Nothing is ever easy. And one of the hardest things to do in this game was watching Seer die in Cal's arms and not having that tug at your heartstrings even a little bit. Especially when Cal brings both bodies out to the Mantis because there's not much time for a proper burial. The characters mourn the loss of their friends, and Cal begins to blame himself since he was the one that let Bode in after all. And it's here that we get a really solid speech from Grease filled with gambling anecdotes that essentially boils down to, you can't blame yourself for the choices others make. Because at the end of the day, Bode still made the choice to sell us out, and now he needs to face the consequences of his actions as soon as we find a way to track him. Oh hey, that tracker Cal gave him at the beginning of the game is still putting out a signal. Time for some consequences. We track Bode to Nova Garen, an Imperial base constructed inside of a crystalline asteroid. Why does the Empire get to have the coolest bases? Like, this place is dope as hell in concept. The only gripe I really have is that I wish they'd let a bit more of the actual asteroid creep through in the designs, but I understand that doesn't fit with the Empire's desire to rebuild the galaxy in their own image. So we begin our infiltration, sneaking through ventilation systems and taking down groups of guards until we find ourselves an Imperial officer. After subduing him and borrowing the uniform, we get an impromptu stealth section where we must sneak past a hallway full of other officers without being recognized, which can be accomplished by simply walking down the hall like any other officer would. We find Bode's room, but it looks like nobody's home, so we might as well take a look around, right? We find a data disk and begin to play it when Cal gets startled from behind and pulls his blaster on a literal child. Jesus Christ. This is Kata, Bode's daughter, who would love to talk with us, but she needs to finish packing. She's packing for exactly the reason you think she is. Bode's on his way, meaning we don't have much time. Cal attempts to make conversation with her, even finding her doll for her, which is super wholesome, and then Bode shows up. He tries to play nice, but Cal is understandably not fucking having it. We learn more of Bode's backstory, including how he survived the Purge, aka Order 66, and that his wife got 86'd by some Inquisitors that had come looking for him. With nowhere to really run, especially with a small child, he cut a deal with the Empire in order to stay hidden until he could find a way out, which is now Tanalorr. Cal rightfully calls him a monster for being so selfish as to not want the hidden path being able to access Tanalorr, to which Bode responds by saying that everything he does is for his daughter and then making a break for it. We follow, but given this is an Imperial base and we are Jedi, that's not going to be so easy. And the game tells you this by throwing a metric shitload of stormtroopers at you as soon as you leave Bode's quarters. Normally, this would be a long, dare I say, difficult fight, but the game has other plans, as this is where we unlock the ability to tap into the dark side. So overcome with rage that nothing can stop us, we rip and tear our way through this base, trivializing even the toughest enemies they can throw at you. And you know what? I get it now. I totally understand how people fall to the dark side. This shit is addictive, dude. Just so much raw power. I'm sure this is where Cal would have crossed the line and become a Sith if it weren't for Merrin being able to bring him back to his senses. I guess thick thighs really do save lives. We return to the Mantis and finish listening to that data disk we found in Bode's chambers, which reveals that Centauri had planned a failsafe in the case of all compasses being destroyed, which involves aligning all three arrays from the Shattered Moon, the Forest Array, and a secret third one that we haven't found yet to reveal a path through the Kobo Abyss. So, naturally, we go back to Kobo. And good news for us, the secret third array is right next to Pyloon's saloon. How convenient. What isn't convenient is that the safety protocols of this array require personnel to remain inside the station, so Grease gets to work on finding someone, anyone, just not Turgle. Good news is he's got plenty of time. Bad news is he has that time because we're preoccupied with fighting off waves on waves on waves of Imperial troops that I guess were just waiting here for us. I don't know, man. I get that the Empire really wants Cal's ass on a mantle, but oh my god, there had to be a better way to convey that besides locking us in a small room while droids and stormtroopers just flood in like nanocom? Oh my god, who writes this shit? It's me. I write this shit. Can you tell I'm tired of the Empire? I can talk about that later though. Right now, we've cleared that room and taken the elevator up to the top of the array. As we're messing around with the control room, Z appears. Honestly, feels really fitting to have her be the one to stay behind and operate the controls, since her initial objective was to activate the arrays. I think. I know she was supposed to go to the forest array, so I'm kind of just extrapolating here. Either way, now we've got a way to reach Tanalorr, so let's find Bode, shall we? But before we do that, we've got an abyss to navigate, and who better to get us through that abyss than our boy Grease. We begin the journey, and Grease pilots us through a beautiful nebula of Kobo dust, but the gaps are getting tighter and obstacles more frequent. Things really aren't looking good for us, so in a desperate measure, Cal talks Grease into going all in on speed, and in the end, Greasy does it, baby. Almost. The arrays begin to overload, and Z can't stop it, meaning there's only one way to make it out alive. Cal locks the fuck in, taps into the Force, and at Seer's word, he sends the Mantis into hyperspace. And the craziest part is, it fucking works. We drop out of hyperspace only to be met with one of the most beautiful looking planets I've seen in a minute. We land and Grease gets to work on patching up any damage done to the Mantis while Cal and Marin head for the old temple. Along the way, they have a much needed conversation about what to do with Bode, where they decide to give him a chance to stand down, but in the end it's like Obi-Wan once said, I will do what I must. As they reach the temple, we hear Kata singing what sounds like a lullaby about a ghost star. Normally, hearing children sing lullabies out of nowhere would be kinda creepy, but here it's got more of a tragic tone than anything. We talk to her about her dad and ask if she can show us where he's at, which she does. As we walk, we learn that she doesn't really like Tanalorr. Wow, who would have thought that being the only two people on an entire planet would be boring as fuck? She does like Marin though, but who doesn't like Marin? Anyway, we find Bode in the temple's main chamber just brooding like a fucking edgelord, and he seems quite surprised to see us, even going as far as pulling a gun on Cal. We try to talk him down, but as I'm sure you've guessed, he's not really listening to reason, which means it's time for our final boss fight of the game. And damn, this one's intense. Bode fights like a cornered animal, which he is if we're being real here, with rapid attacks, including this bullshit grab move that I just couldn't dodge for some reason. We're treated to various cutscenes at specific health bar intervals, changing the scenery of the fight as his moveset evolves in a desperate attempt to defend what he believes is the right thing to do. Especially in the cutscene between his second and third phase where Bode manages to disarm Cal, tosses his own saber aside, and proceeds to beat the ever-loving shit out of you. He even smacks BD, and that's where we draw the line. The screen fades to black, and a red tint begins to take over as the text "Embrace the Dark Side" appears on screen. And by pressing those buttons, you unleash all of Cal's pent-up emotions in one outburst as he forces Bode off of him and resumes the fight. It's so good, man. I've been loving this trend where games let you go berserk at some point. Any way to let players have more fun than they already were is always a plus in my book. Anyway, the fight with Bode reaches its end when Cal has him at lightsaber point, giving him one last chance to surrender. Bode asks if Cal would be able to protect Kata when the Empire comes, and when Cal doesn't answer, Bode puts him in a chokehold. Kata and Marin rush to help, but Bode pushes Kata back before force choking Marin. Obviously, we can't let the baddest bitch in the galaxy die, so using some teamwork, Cal manages to break free, and there's a standoff between him and Bode. Bode's quicker to fire, but his blaster's broken, meaning we win by default. Cal pulls the trigger, puts a laser in Bode's chest, and then fucking double taps him. Holy shit, that's cold. The next cutscene we get features Marin talking to Kata while giving her the whole spiel about grief, loss, and how it's important that while you can feel those things, you shouldn't let them consume you, or else you end up like Bode. Too soon? Too soon. So let's actually honor the dead with this beautiful funeral scene. They've gathered the bodies of Cere, Cordova, and Bode on their own separate pyres, and when Cal gives the signal, Marin lights them. It's such a heartfelt scene and honestly a bit of a tearjerker. Don't even get me started on the choice to have Kata run up to Bode's pyre and put her doll on it with him. That shit almost had me in tears, dude. We're treated to a time-lapse of the funeral, everyone but Cal moving on while he just stands there to watch until the sun comes up while the fire fades, bathing the landscape in a soft red light. Cal speaks about Cere, and while he does, the camera pans around him, dissipating the red hue as he reconnects with the light, unsure if he's ready for what fate brings his way next. The credits roll, and this is where I would be done, but we're treated to an after-credits scene with Cal, Marin, and Grease deciding to continue with their original plan of using Tanalorr to assist the hidden path. And then the credits roll. What a good story, am I right? Of course I am, I'm always right. And if you just came to hear what I thought about the gameplay and the story, then this video ends here for you. But if you're one of the 176 people that watched my Fallen Order video, you might remember I had a segment discussing the different characters and what I thought about them. I'm doing that again. Partly to make this video longer than it really needs to be, but mainly because the characters have changed in that time frame and I'd like to talk about that. Now, in my last Star Wars video, a lot of my character analysis was fairly shallow due to the game being fairly short, and while I voiced frustrations about that in said video, I was looking at the characters through the lens of Fallen Order being a standalone game, since at the time of writing that portion of the script, it was. But now we've got a sequel, with character development, and an even longer runtime. However, I will be sticking to the main crew of the Mantis with the exceptions of Cordova and Bode. So let's talk about where these characters started, where they ended up, and in case it's not obvious, there will still be spoilers in this section. Case in point, Cere, who arguably had the most drastic character development across the two games, going from alive to dead just like any good mentor figure. And while I could just leave it at that, I'd rather take a look at what happened in between those 2 points, since actions are what make a character. When we first meet Cere, she's a former Jedi who cut herself off from the Force due to trauma. She takes it upon herself to teach Cal how to be a Jedi, and as the game progresses, we learn that this was most likely a way for her to cope with the fact that her own Padawan was taken from her and tortured to the point of switching to the dark side. And to me, this seems to be Cere's most defining characteristic. Yes, she wants to help because she believes it's the right thing to do, but she also wants to help as a way to make up for her failings in the past. So where do we see her in Jedi Survivor? Working with Cordova to assist the hidden path while also rebuilding the Jedi archives. It feels like a direct continuation of where her story ended in Fallen Order, but it also feels like the same story as the first game, except this time she dies at the end. Or at least it would feel that way if the writers hadn't made her grow as a person by removing the subtly selfish motivations she carried in the first game via her taking on the Empire at Cal's side before making the decision to part ways with the group and focus her efforts on something more tangible. How dare they give me scenes to show how Cere's actually about that preservation and assistance lifestyle so that her death in the rematch with Vader hits so much harder. My fault for expecting lazy character writing out of fucking Star Wars, I guess. Not like they'd set a precedent for that in their recent projects or anything. Because if we wanted to talk about lazy character writing on a real note, then we'd have to talk about Cordova. I kinda hate how dirty they did him in this game, if I'm being honest. Having him show up on Jedha was great, and I really thought he'd be a crucial character in the game, but then he's just the guy we bring the MacGuffins to after we find them, and then he fucking dies after serving his purpose. What the hell, man? I was so ready to learn more about the Jedi Master that dedicated his life to researching the Zepho, and what happened to land him on Jedha restoring archives. But now you're telling me I won't get to because he's fucking dead? That's cringe. I didn't even really feel sad when he died because I barely knew the guy. I was only sad because BD1 was sad, but past that I was sad because I knew I was never going to get to connect with him as a character. I will say, subverting my expectations by revealing the character I thought was dead was actually alive, and then subverting my expectations again by killing him off like 5 hours later is clever, but I just felt betrayed. And since we're on the topic of betrayal, we might as well talk about Bode. God, I love to hate this guy. I've seen some discussion as to whether or not people expected his plot twist, and it's pretty divisive. With some players, myself included, never questioning Bode's character and getting whiplashed at the twist, and others being suspicious of him from the start. That's just good writing, dude. Because, yeah, kicking off the game with a job gone wrong and the only two survivors are the main character and this guy is definitely suspicious. And they could have sowed that suspicion even more by just having him conveniently pop up every now and then with some jetpack ex machina to solve our problems, but they didn't. Instead, they purposely made him a character that you could relate to, making him have these very real, very personal conversations with Cal where they talk about their visions for the future and their values. They made him a loving dad, for fuck's sake. And the best part is, none of it felt forced. Everything about Bode felt natural. He's a lone wolf type fighting for a better future so that his daughter doesn't have to grow up in the same world that he did. How could you not like him? Even when he does inevitably betray us, it doesn't feel out of character. He's established himself as a dad who would do anything for his daughter, so can we really judge him when he actually did anything for his daughter? Yes. Yes, we can. Because what Bode represents is desperation without morals. Lots of people talk about how they're willing to do anything for their loved ones, but Bode is the first character I've seen in a minute that actually backed it up. Do you think Grease would sell out his friends if it meant that his gambling debts would be erased? Actually, yes, I fully believe that a younger Grease would sell his friends out without hesitation, but that's not the point. The point is, Bode acts so selfishly that he can't fathom any goal beyond his own. Seriously, everything is about his daughter, to the point where his conversations with Cal take on a more nefarious tone in hindsight as you realize that he'd been trying to get Cal to side with him. And when he doesn't, Bode just goes off the fucking rails, kills Cordova, and sells out his friends. Talk about a crash out, dude, holy shit. Even his final question to Cal can be interpreted as, are you willing to abandon your morals if it means keeping my kid out of the Empire's hands? Because he knows we won't. Fuck, I love a good morally gray character. I wish we could have more of them, but y'all can't handle that responsibly, so here we are. Anyway, I talked about Grease in that last bit, so this is the segue now. Grease's character is honestly kinda tragic in my eyes. He went from an untrusting pilot with a gambling problem to a pilot with a group of friends that he loved going on adventures with in the first game, and where do we find him in the follow-up? Incredibly lonely on Kobo, running a saloon, desperate for any sort of human connection. Why do you think he jumps at the chance to join up with Cal again? Why else would he have kept Cal's scrapper outfit all these years? He just wanted that familial connection back, and at the start of the game, he'd finally gotten it. Just for it all to crumble when Bode sold them out. Suddenly, his longest friend was dead, his newest friend turned out to be a piece of shit, and to top it all off, now he's the honorary grandfather of the kid he helped orphan. But with all that loss, something has to be gained, right? And that's true. Between the two games, we see Grease go from a guy who wants to lay low and play it safe, to a guy who's willing to take risks as long as he's got some friends backing him up. I really love the slow burn of turning Grease into a guy who bets on money to a guy who bets on people instead. It's such a well done way to give him growth and character development while also keeping that core gambling element in his character. I really feel like they did him justice here, and I can't wait to see what happens with his character in the third game. But, of course, we can't talk about doing a character justice without talking about Merrin. I complained about her character a lot in the first game because she was introduced so late that we didn't get to learn much about her outside of the fact that she's the last of her people. She was a character who knew that the only thing she wanted to do was to see the galaxy. So it was nice that when she shows up in Survivor, we learned that she'd made the decision to go off and explore the galaxy on her own terms. She's sure of herself now, more confident, she knows what she wants. I just wish we'd gotten to see more of that in the game rather than being told. Granted, I think there's a reason for that, and I'll get there in a minute. I just want to focus on Merrin for a second. I think it's great that we got to see more of her in this game for obvious reasons, but obvious reasons aside, it's so important to me that we could see more of her personality. When we first met her, she was cold, untrusting, and deservedly so, but now that she's had time to herself, she really grew as a person. Yes, she's more confident, but she's also funny and charismatic. Hopefully we can learn more about how she became that person in the next game, but if we don't, then I'm fine with it, so long as her character isn't ruined by the end of this thing. If they fuck up Marin, I will be fighting someone. Right now, they have her set up to act as Cal's driving force, the person who steers him back to the righteous path when he deviates, as we saw in the Imperial base. So if that somehow gets abandoned in the third game and they just make her a generic love interest, I'm gonna be so fucking upset, man. Cal needs his space witch girlfriend. Actually, let's talk about Cal now. He is the main character after all. Plus, I spent so much time in my last video bitching about how he felt like a blank canvas so that players could project onto him. And so that I could make some ginger jokes, but can you blame me? But when you look at the first game as a standalone thing, it's not hard to see why I didn't feel any connection to Cal as a character. However, now that we can look at his character across multiple games, it's a bit more clear what they were going for. I talked about how I thought there was a good reason that Marin entered the game as a full character without showing us any of that development, and this is it. I think that the reason every other character is so sure of who they are and what they believe is to highlight the fact that Cal himself has no idea what the fuck he wants to be. Fallen Order follows Cal as he works to unlock the holocron because Seer and Cordova told him to do it. Fallen Order then ends with Cal making the decision to destroy the holocron and choosing to follow his own path. Jedi Survivor starts with Cal realizing that what he wanted, to fight the Empire, is practically fucking pointless, and then spends the whole game resolving that identity crisis, ending with him knowing what he wants to do and getting ready to embark on that adventure with Marin and Grease. Obviously, he still has lessons he'll need to learn, but now he won't have Seer to guide him through that. He'll need to learn those lessons himself, process them in his own way, find his own identity. It's an incredibly compelling character arc that I'm really looking forward to seeing the conclusion of whenever the next game comes out, so long as they don't fumble it. God, I hope they don't fumble it, especially because we've never seen Respawn do a trilogy before. And that's it. I've gone over all the characters, said what I wanted to say, but I can't help feel like I'm missing something. Oh yeah, Scuba Stev is an Adam Sandler reference.